parental guidance is suggested for the following program with occasional scenes of nudity.
Great Britain, 1990s. A terrible threat hangs over the kingdom. It hasn't come from elsewhere. It is already in action in a parallel universe, that of the wizards. A powerful black wizard, he who must not be named for fear of dire consequences, is plotting to rule the world and subject it to a reign of terror. At the same time, a young orphan enrolls at the School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, not realizing that his destiny is to fight the Dark Lord to the death. It is at Hogwarts boarding school in Scotland that Harry Potter gradually discovers the role he must play in this battle. Helped by his friends Ron and Hermione, the young wizard must confront the Army of Darkness, made up of Death Eaters and Dementors from the terrifying island prison of Azkaban. Albus Dumbledore, the head wizard at Hogwarts who is leading the resistance, will be his mentor for the most powerful spells. Voldemort's victory will never be complete as long as Harry Potter lives. The real story of Harry Potter begins in Edinburgh. Scotland's fantastic and mysterious capital is a UNESCO-designated city of literature and has already inspired numerous authors. The start of 1994, J.K. Rowling, who was unknown to the general public at the time, was a regular visitor to a tea room in the Old Town. This was where she wrote the first volume of this fantasy saga, which was to become a worldwide phenomenon of children's literature and cinema. She spent hours filling pages with stories born of her imagination, identifying her characters and imagining wizards, scenery, and fantastical creatures, which would go on to make up the world of Harry Potter. For her fans from around the world, this cafe is the starting point for a pilgrimage through this fantasy series. The walls of the toilets are covered with their handwritten messages, left here to express their gratitude to the author. From the cafe window, the writer could cast her eyes over Castle Rock, which towers above the Old Town, medieval in its origins. The old centre of Edinburgh is a maze of alleys and dark courtyards. Its dramatic architecture reflects its troubled past. The Old Town is the ideal setting for a fantasy novel.
They'd look for prostitutes, homeless, travellers, anyone they didn't think people would notice that they went missing. They would get them blind drunk before very kindly offering them a bed in their house for the night. Upon getting them back to their house, Burke would sit on their stomach and Hare would shove his fingers down their throat, forcing them to throw up before choking to death on their own sick. The reason they use this method is...
Edinburgh abounds in sordid stories, bloody anecdotes and mysterious legends, each one more real than the last. The author of Harry Potter enjoyed wandering here in the old graveyard of Greyfriars Church, the most famous graveyard in the whole of Scotland. It was here, with its very special atmosphere, where J.K. Rowling took the name Tom Riddle, who soon became known as Lord Voldemort.
Earlier, I was telling you about the Covenanters, the religious reformers of the 17th century who were persecuted for their views. After they were defeated in battle, some of the very zealous Covenanters were defeated in 1679. 1,200 of them were brought to Edinburgh as prisoners. Now, there were too many to keep them in the castle, so they were actually held in a temporary prison that was set up in a field to the south of Greyfriars. Essentially, it was a concentration camp. And hundreds of them went on to die. They were sentenced to death by a man called George Mackenzie, known as Bloody Mackenzie, because of his zeal for
As night falls, mysterious silhouettes dance around this graveyard, and costume storytellers recount sinister tales, which still resonate in the Scottish capital. This is the famous sword of the Highland warriors, the formidable Claymore, which is held in two hands and which caused so much devastation on the battlefields. In a small workshop in Edinburgh, a fencing master reproduces faithful replicas of swords used by legendary Scottish figures, such as Robert the Bruce, crowned King of Scotland in 1306, or Rob Roy MacGregor, a famous outlaw and popular hero from the start of the 18th century. For over 20 years, Paul MacDonald has been producing these completely authentic weapons. The swords that come out of his workshop are not toys or decorative objects to be hung on the wall.
At this time, you would only have carried a sword if it was part of your profession. Swords in the 14th century were not carried by civilians on the street. They were really just at this time carried by soldiers, men-at-arms, engaged in warfare and conflict. A little bit more flow just on this one. Looks good for next stage. This type of sword is of a size that's designed to be used with one hand first. The grip is large enough that you can also have a second hand on the sword for stronger blows, stronger cuts, stronger defence, but it's mostly designed to be used in one hand. But the blade is long enough and also has enough weight. It's really, I would say, ideal for a cavalry sword. So I think this sword is a good example of a medieval cavalry sword. It could deliver very strong cuts from horseback, and a good cut with an edge like this against flesh and bone is more than a scratch. It's you could remove a hand, an arm, a leg, a head cleanly with a single cut from a sword like this. I think I've always been creative. I've always liked making things and doing things with my hands since I was young, but I never really had an outlet for that until coming to Edinburgh. Defend yourself from a sword is either done by the art of not being there, moving quickly enough. You can defend very strongly against strong cuts very easily. Under the blade, slightly more. Up. Yes.
On the hills overlooking Edinburgh, Paul MacDonald practices the art of fencing. Over the centuries, the Scottish capital has seen many a warrior cross swords, and in her saga, J.K. Rowling makes the sword the weapon of choice for eliminating evil forces. London and Wales may have provided the locations for many of the sets in the Harry Potter films, but it is in the midst of this northern land that the bulk of the story unfolds. It was this dramatic light, these rugged mountains, and these steep-sided valleys that J.K. Rowling had in mind when she set the scene of the fatal confrontation between Harry Potter and Voldemort. number of scenes were set in the west of Scotland, in the region of Glenfinnan. This is where the famous Hogwarts Express ran, the steam train which took Harry Potter to his school of witchcraft and wizardry.